Damon Ashford pulled his truck to the shoulder of Route 9 at exactly 4:17 on a Friday afternoon in November. The patrol car ahead sat with hazard lights blinking amber against the gray sky, and his first instinct, honed over 40 years of living black in America, was to keep driving. Pretend he hadn't seen. Let someone else stop. Someone whose skin color wouldn't immediately code him as threat rather than help. But Lyric sat in the back seat with her coloring book, humming something she'd learned in second grade and he'd spent 7.5 years teaching her to be kind. To help people who needed it. To see the world as a place where goodness mattered more than safety, even when that lesson cost him sleep at night. The words slipped out before he could stop them. "Someone's in trouble, baby. Daddy's going to help." Lyric looked up. Crayon paused mid-stroke. "Why are you stopping?" Because a police vehicle on a lonely highway could mean anything from a flat tire to something worse, and walking away from someone in need would make him the kind of man he'd promised himself he'd never become. Because if she saw him drive past, she'd learn that fear was stronger than decency, and that was a lesson he refused to teach. He shifted into park and stepped out slowly, hands deliberately visible at his sides. The afternoon light caught the frost on the grass beside the highway, sharp and white, against the browns of late autumn. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn echoed across the valley. He kept his movements careful, predictable, the kind of choreography every black man learned without anyone ever having to teach it explicitly. The officer turned around, removing her sunglasses, and the ground shifted beneath Damon's feet in a way that had nothing to do with balance. Reese Hartwell stood beside the disabled cruiser, 12 years older than the last time he'd seen her, wearing a uniform that should have made her a stranger, but somehow made the recognition hit harder. Those eyes hadn't changed, still that particular shade of green that had once made him think of spring leaves back when he'd been young enough to think in poetry. Her hair was shorter now, pulled back in a professional bun, and there were lines at the corners of her mouth that hadn't been there before. She saw him at the exact same moment. Something flickered across her face, recognition certainly, but beneath that a complicated tangle of emotions that played out in the space of a heartbeat before professional neutrality slammed down like a shield. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 4. Long enough for him to remember the ring he'd never given her, still wrapped in tissue paper in the back of his dresser drawer. Long enough to taste the particular bitterness of seeing someone who'd vanished from your life, without explanation, standing there in a uniform that gave her all the power in this moment. His voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "Car trouble." Reese's response was equally controlled, equally careful. "Alternator, I think. Just died. Radio's out too." He nodded slowly, aware of every car that passed, every driver who slowed down to crane their neck at the scene. A black man standing beside a police cruiser, a white female officer watching him. He could feel their assumptions pressing against his back like physical weight. The words came out measured, respectful. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated just a fraction of a second, but he caught it, then stepped aside. As he leaned over the engine, he became acutely conscious of every movement. Kept his hands where she could see them. Made no sudden gestures. The engine was simple enough, the problem obvious. A loose connection on the alternator easily fixed with the tools in his truck. He walked back to his vehicle, each step deliberate. Lyric had pressed her face against the window, breath fogging the glass. Her voice rang out high and clear. "Daddy, is the police lady okay?" Something in his chest loosened at the innocence in that question. The complete absence of the caution he'd tried so hard to cultivate, without crushing her spirit entirely. His response came gentle. "She's fine, baby, just needs help with her car." He retrieved his toolbox and returned to the cruiser. Reese stood with arms crossed, posture rigid, glancing at passing vehicles. She was worried too, he realized. Not about him perhaps, but about how this looked, about what assumptions someone might make, and how quickly a misunderstanding could spiral into something dangerous for him. The understanding didn't make him feel better. Her voice came quiet, almost lost in the wind. "You don't have to do this." He tightened the connection, checked the wires, kept his eyes on the work. "I know. The engine turned over on the first try. He closed the hood and stepped back, putting distance between them again. The transaction complete. The stranger in uniform and the man who'd stopped to help, nothing more. But Reese's eyes drifted to his truck, to the small face still watching through the back window, and something in her expression cracked just slightly. "Is that your daughter?" The question felt dangerous in ways he couldn't articulate, confirming that he had a child, a vulnerability, something precious that could be threatened. But lying seemed worse somehow. His voice came flat. "Yes." Reese's next words were so soft he almost didn't hear them. "She's beautiful." Before he could respond, before he could decide whether to accept the compliment or shut down the conversation entirely, Lyric's voice cut through the November air with perfect timing. "Daddy, I'm hungry. You said we'd get ice cream." Despite everything, despite 12 years of silence and hurt and questions that had never been answered, Damon felt his lips twitch towards something that might have been a smile. Reese laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle her. Her voice came lighter, almost normal. "Ice cream in November, she's persuasive." The tension between them shifted, softened by the innocent interruption. Reese took a step closer to the truck, bending slightly to wave at Lyric through the window. The exchange was simple. "Hi there. What's your name?" "Lyric. I'm 7 3/4. "That's very specific." "Daddy says specific is good." Reese straightened, and when she looked at Damon again, some of the professional distance had faded from her eyes. What remained was harder to read, memory perhaps, or regret, or something else entirely that he didn't have the energy to decipher. Her voice came formal again. "Thank you for stopping." He could have said "you're welcome," could have said it was nothing. Instead, the truth slipped out. Anyone would have. They both knew that wasn't true. He gathered his tools and walked back to his truck without looking back. As he pulled onto the highway, he glanced in the rearview mirror once. Reese stood beside her cruiser, watching them drive away, her figure growing smaller until a curve in the road took her out of sight entirely. Lyric was already talking about ice cream flavors, debating between mint chocolate chip and cookies and cream, but Damon barely heard her. His mind had traveled 12 years into the past, to a small apartment in Albany, to a ring he'd saved 8 months to buy, to a future he'd planned in such specific detail that losing it had felt like a death. Reese hadn't just left, she'd disappeared. One day she was there laughing at his terrible jokes, stealing bites of his breakfast, talking about maybe getting a dog someday, and the next day she was gone. No note, no explanation. No forwarding address, nothing but the echo of her absence in every corner of that apartment until he couldn't stand to be there anymore. He'd looked for her, called her friends, her family, anyone who might know where she'd gone. Her best friend Linda had finally told him to stop. "She doesn't want to be found. You need to let her go." So he had, eventually. After 6 months of looking over his shoulder every time he walked into a coffee shop or grocery store hoping to see her. After another 6 months of flinching every time his phone rang with an unknown number. After a year of carrying that ring in his pocket like a talisman against forgetting. And now she was back. In Riverside, wearing a badge, acting like they were strangers who'd just met on a roadside instead of two people who'd once planned a future together. Maybe that's what they were now. 12 years was a long time, long enough to build an entire life, long enough to bury the past so deep you thought it would stay down. But some things didn't stay buried. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road 3 miles outside Riverside proper, surrounded by land that had taken Damon 8 years to pay off. The white paint was peeling in places and the porch steps creaked with age, but the deed had his name on it, and the mortgage was satisfied 2 years ahead of schedule. That meant something. That meant everything. Lyric bounded out of the truck and ran toward the front door. Ice cream finished and immediately forgotten in favor of whatever new adventure her 7-year-old mind had conjured. Damon followed more slowly, toolbox heavy in his hand, mind still stuck on a road somewhere between here and there. Vivian Ashford sat in her rocking chair on the porch, a wool blanket across her lap despite the November chill. At 73, she should have been slowing down, taking it easy, letting someone else worry about the world for a change. Instead, she read 3 newspapers a day and kept tabs on everyone in Riverside with the efficiency of a woman who'd spent 50 years paying attention. She wasn't his biological mother. The state had placed him with her at 15 after the foster system had given up on finding anyone else willing to take a teenage black boy with anger issues and a file thick enough to be its own novel. She'd taken one look at him and said he could stay as long as he followed 2 rules: no lying and no quitting. He'd followed both, mostly. Her voice came without accusation. "You're late." He set the toolbox down beside the steps. "Got held up on Route 9. Trouble. Nothing I couldn't handle." Vivian studied him with eyes that had always seen too much. She'd raised 5 foster children over the years, and she'd learned to read the silences between words the way other people read books. Her question came careful. "Who was it?" Damon looked out across the fields, brown and dormant in the winter chill. The land stretched away toward a line of trees that marked the property boundary, and beyond that the world continued without caring what happened on this particular 3 acres. The name felt strange in his mouth after so many years of not saying it. Reese Hartwell. Vivian's rocking chair went still. Inside the house, Lyric's voice echoed as she called for her grandmother to come and see something urgent and probably imaginary. But Vivian didn't move. Her next words came quiet. "That girl who left, she's a cop now, working in town apparently." The rocking chair remained motionless. Vivian's face showed nothing, but her hands had tightened on the armrests. After a moment, she asked the only question that mattered. "How do you feel about that?" It was such a simple question, such an impossible one. His shoulders moved in something that might have been a shrug. "I feel like it doesn't matter how I feel. She's here, I'm here. We'll probably run into each other." He paused. "It's a small town." Vivian rose slowly from her chair, the blanket falling to the side. She put a weathered hand on his arm, and the gesture carried more weight than words could have. "You've built something good here, Damon. For yourself. For that child. Don't let old ghosts shake the foundation." She went inside, where Lyric was spreading coloring books across the kitchen table with the focused intensity of someone planning a major artistic undertaking. Damon started dinner on autopilot, chopping vegetables with the methodical rhythm that always calmed his mind when thinking became too complicated. But his thoughts kept circling back to a conversation he would need to have with Lyric someday soon. The talk. Every black parent knew it, prepared for it, dreaded it. The careful instructions about how to behave if stopped by police, hands visible, voice calm, "Yes sir, no sir, don't make sudden movements, don't argue even if you're right, survive first, seek justice later if you're still alive to try." He'd been preparing for it, rehearsing the words in his head, trying to find a way to explain the world to her that wouldn't shatter her innocence completely. She was still young enough to see life in terms of good guys and bad guys. Still innocent enough to believe that helping people was always safe, that kindness was always rewarded. Standing on that roadside today, he'd felt the old familiar tension. The awareness that his skin color preceded him into every interaction, shaped every assumption before he could speak a single word. He'd spent his adult life building a life of caution, taking jobs where his skills spoke for themselves, avoiding bars and crowds in any situation that could spiral beyond his control. This farm wasn't just about independence, it was about safety. Here on his own land, he could breathe without calculating every move. Here he could exist without needing permission or explanation. But even here, the world found ways to remind him. Lyric's voice pulled him back. "Daddy!" He looked down. She stood beside him, small hand tugging at his sleeve. Her request came simple. "Can we have mac and cheese too?" He smiled, pushing the heavier thoughts aside for now. "We're having vegetables. Vegetables and mac and cheese. Just vegetables. Grandma says I should have mac and cheese because I'm a growing girl." From the living room, Vivian's voice called out with perfect timing. "Don't you put words in my mouth, Lyric giggled and the sound washed over Damon like warm water. This was why he'd built this life. This moment, this laughter, this small person who looked at him like he hung the moon and painted the stars. Whatever Reese's return meant, whatever old wounds it might reopen, he wouldn't let it touch this. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while the wind rattled the old windows, he couldn't shake the memory of her face. The way she'd looked at him before putting her sunglasses back on. Like she wanted to say something. Like she was afraid to. Like 12 years hadn't been enough time to figure out which words could possibly matter after such a long, slender Saturday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only November could provide. Sky so blue it hurt to look at. At air cold enough to see your breath, everything sharp-edged and unforgiving. Vivian had gone to church early for some committee meeting about the Christmas pageant, leaving Damon and Lyric to their weekend routine. By mid-morning, they were pulling into a parking spot along Main Street for the farmers' market. The weekly gathering had been a riverside tradition for as long as anyone could remember. Local vendors set up their stalls along 3 blocks, selling everything from winter squash to handmade soap to the kettle corn that Lyric loved enough to budget her allowance around. Damon loved it for different reasons. The normalcy, the simple rhythm of small-town life. The feeling that he belonged here, that this was his community too, even when certain glances suggested otherwise. They were examining a display of winter squash when he saw her. Reese stood 3 stalls down, dressed in civilian clothes, a blue sweater and jeans that made her look softer, somehow more human than the uniform had allowed. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light, and for a moment she was 26 again and laughing at something he'd said, and everything was possible. Then she turned and saw them, and the moment shattered. For a breath, neither moved. Then Lyric spotted her, and the decision was made. The words came out with 7-year-old enthusiasm, "Daddy, it's the police lady." Before Damon could respond, his daughter had broken away and was running toward Reese with the boundless energy that only children possessed. The kind of unself-conscious joy that didn't know yet to be cautious. Reese knelt down to Lyric's level and something genuine crossed her face. "Hi there. Remember me? I remember I'm Lyric." The words tumbled out fast. "We got mint chocolate chip ice cream yesterday. It's the best flavor. What's your favorite?" Reese's response came with a small smile, probably strawberry. Lyric wrinkled her nose in the universal expression of childhood disapproval. "That's a boring choice." Damon had caught up to them by then, and his voice came automatic. "Lyric, that's not polite." But his daughter was undeterred. "It's true, though." Reese laughed, standing up, and for a second the sound was exactly like he remembered. "She's not wrong, it is a boring choice. I've just always liked it." The interaction was drawing attention. Damon felt it before he saw it, the subtle shift in energy. The way conversations nearby got quieter, the weight of observation settling over them like a physical thing. Conrad Baker, who sold honey and beeswax candles from a stall 10 feet away, leaned over his table. The question was directed at Reese, but the implication was directed at Damon. "You two know each other." The words carried undertones. "Explain this. Justify this proximity. Make it make sense in a way that doesn't challenge what I think I know about how the world should work." Reese's response came even professional. "He helped me with car trouble last week. I was stranded on Route 9. Conrad nodded, but his eyes lingered on Damon a moment too long. "Good Samaritan, then, something like that." The conversation should have ended there. Instead, it hung in the air, weighted with everything unspoken. Mrs. Patterson from 3 farms over had paused her inspection of apple cider to watch. Hollis Crane stood near the kettle corn stand, pretending to check his phone but very clearly paying attention. Damon put his hand on Lyric's shoulder. The gesture protective. "We should get going. Still need to pick up eggs." But Lyric was oblivious to the undercurrents. "But Daddy, I want to show her my loose tooth." His voice came firm. "Maybe next time, baby." Reese's smile had faded, replaced by something more complicated. She'd seen the looks, understood the dynamics, knew exactly what was happening, even if she couldn't do anything to stop it. Her words came careful. "It was good to see you, Lyric." Then meeting Damon's eyes, "You too." She said his name like she was testing it, remembering how it felt in her mouth after 12 years of silence. He nodded once and guided his daughter away, conscious of every eye tracking their movement. As they walked toward the egg vendor, Lyric chattered about everything and nothing: the cool weather, the pumpkins still on display, even though Halloween was past, a dog she'd seen tied up outside the coffee shop. Damon listened with half his attention, the other half processing what had just happened. The thought came unbidden: Reese could leave this town whenever she wanted. Could take a promotion transfer to another jurisdiction, start over somewhere else when things got uncomfortable. She had that freedom, that mobility, that option. But Damon was rooted here. His farm, his daughter, his mother, his life built into this soil like crops that couldn't be transplanted without dying. He couldn't just pull up stakes when things got complicated, couldn't disappear when the pressure got too heavy. He had to live with whatever consequences came, had to navigate this space that suddenly felt smaller, had to explain his presence to suspicious vendors and watchful neighbors. That was the cost Reese never had to pay, the cost she probably never even thought about. Lyric's voice cut through his thoughts. "Daddy, you're squeezing my hand too hard." He loosened his grip immediately. "Sorry, baby. Are you okay?" He looked down at his daughter, at eyes wide with concern that no 7-year-old should have to feel for her father. The words came gentle: "I'm fine. Just thinking." About what? About how to explain a world that doesn't make sense, about how to teach you to navigate spaces that weren't built for us, about how to love you enough to prepare you without scaring you, about how to keep you safe without teaching you to be afraid. Instead, he said, about what kind of eggs we should get, brown or white. Brown, they look like chocolate. They don't taste like chocolate. I know, but they could if you believed hard enough. He laughed despite himself, despite everything, and the weight on his chest eased slightly. This child, this impossible, wonderful child, she made everything bearable. But as they paid for their eggs and walked back to the truck, Damon caught sight of Reese one more time. She stood alone beside her car, watching them go. The look on her face was one he couldn't quite decipher, but it stayed with him long after they'd driven home. The following Tuesday arrived with rain that turned the gravel driveway into mud and made the autumn fields look even more desolate. Damon had been working on a broken fence post when he heard the engine, that particular sound of a patrol car that every black man learned to identify without conscious thought. He watched it approach up the driveway, his hammer still in hand. A cold knot forming in his stomach. The rain had stopped 20 minutes ago, leaving everything wet and gray and unwelcoming. Reese stepped out in full uniform this time, professional, distant. The woman from the roadside in the market had been replaced by Officer Hartwell, and the transformation was complete enough to feel deliberate. Her voice came formal: "Mr. Ashford." Mr. Ashford, like they were strangers, like she hadn't once known every inch of him, hadn't once fallen asleep with her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat, hadn't once talked about names for children they might have someday. His response matched her tone. "Officer Hartwell, something wrong? Just doing routine checks. There've been some property thefts in the area. We're making rounds to all the farms." He didn't believe her. There had been no reports of theft that he'd heard, and in a town this small, news traveled fast. Especially news that gave people something to worry about, something to discuss at the market or after church. His voice came carefully neutral. "You're welcome to look around." She walked the perimeter of his property with a clipboard in hand, making notes that he suspected said nothing at all. He followed at a distance, aware of multiple sets of eyes watching the scene unfold. Hollis Crane had come out onto his own porch 200 yards away. He stood there with a cup of coffee, watching like it was entertainment provided for his benefit. Hollis had never been outright hostile, but he'd also never been friendly. He occupied that uncomfortable middle ground of polite suspicion that Damon had learned to navigate, the kind where every interaction was cordial on the surface, but weighted with unspoken questions underneath. Inside the house, Lyric appeared at the window. her face pressed against the glass, expression confused and slightly worried. Vivian stood behind her, hands on the child's shoulders. Her own face unreadable, but her posture unmistakably protective. Reese completed her circuit and returned to where Damon stood. The clipboard went back under her arm, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Her voice came quieter. "Everything looks secure, no signs of forced entry or suspicious activity." "Glad to hear it." But she didn't leave. She stood there, patrol car idling behind her eyes, searching his face for something he wasn't sure he could give or even name. The question came, unexpected. "Can I ask you something off the record?" He waited, not trusting himself to speak yet. Her next words hit harder than they should have. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place, starting over somewhere else?" The question felt like a betrayal in ways he couldn't fully articulate, as if his presence here was the problem, as if the solution to the tension and the watching and the questions was for him to be the one who left. His voice came steady despite the anger building underneath. "This is my home, my daughter's home, my mother's home. Why would I leave? I don't know. Sometimes people outgrow places, move on to something better." "Better than what? Better than land I own outright, better than a community where I've built a life." He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone has the luxury of just picking up and leaving when things get complicated." The words hung between them, charged with 12 years of silence and hurt, and all the things they'd never said to each other. Reese's jaw tightened, and he watched her struggle with whatever response wanted to surface. "That's not fair." The truth came out before he could stop it. "Neither was waking up to find you gone. No note, no explanation, just gone." He set down his hammer, giving his hands something to do besides clench into fists. "So you'll forgive me if I don't take advice about moving on from someone who made running away look easy." She flinched as if he'd struck her. The clipboard nearly slipped from her hands. Her voice came tight. "Damon." But he was done. Done with this conversation, done with pretending they were strangers, done with trying to be professional when nothing about this was professional at all. "Thank you for checking on the property, officer. I assume you have other farms to visit." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she nodded once, sharp and professional, and walked back to her car. He watched her drive away, dust rising behind her tires despite the rain-dampened ground. Hollis Crane was still on his porch, still watching. Damon picked up his hammer and went back to fixing the fence, but his hands were shaking and the nail he'd been driving sat crooked in the wood. That evening, after Lyric had gone to bed and the house had settled into the particular quiet that only old houses achieved, Vivian found him on the porch. She didn't say anything at first, just sat in her rocking chair with a blanket across her lap and let the sun stretch. Finally, her voice came gentle in the darkness. "Want to talk about it?" "Not much to talk about. She came by, did her job, left." "That why you've been staring at nothing for the past 2 hours?" He didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had too many answers and none of them seemed adequate. Vivian's next words came measured, the kind of wisdom she'd earned through 73 years of watching people make the same mistakes over and over. "That girl is carrying something heavy. I saw it in her eyes." "So am I. Difference is I didn't put it there." "You sure about that?" He turned to look at her, but her face was shadowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means maybe she had reasons for leaving. Maybe those reasons made sense to her at the time." Vivian paused. "Doesn't make them right. But understanding isn't the same as excusing. She could have told me. Could have given me a choice. Could have. Should have. Lots of things we all could have done different." The rocking chair creaked as she leaned back. "But we don't get to go back and do them over. Only get to decide what we do with what we've got now." Inside the house, Lyric called out in her sleep some fragment of a dream that needed addressing. Damon started to get up, but Vivian waved him back down and went, herself moving with the careful slowness of someone whose joints protested every movement. Damon sat alone on the porch, watching the darkness settle over his land. and tried not to think about the fact that his phone was in his pocket and he knew how to find Reese's number if he wanted to. Tried not to acknowledge the part of him that wanted answers badly enough to risk asking questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. 3 days later she came back, not in uniform this time, not with an excuse about property theft or routine checks. She came at dusk on Friday evening when the sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Damon was on the porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the day surrender to night. He saw her headlights before he heard her engine. She parked at the end of the driveway and walked the rest of the way, her steps slow and uncertain like someone approaching something they both wanted and feared in equal measure. His voice came flat before she could speak. "Lyric's asleep. Vivian too. I know. I waited." Of course she had. Whatever she'd come to say, she'd wanted to say it without witnesses, without the buffer of his daughter's innocence or his mother's wisdom. Just the two of them and whatever words she'd been carrying for however long. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. The temperature had dropped with the sunset and her breath came out in small clouds that dissipated almost immediately. Her next words came quiet. "I owe you an explanation. 12 years overdue. But yes, I'd say you do. You don't owe me anything, Damon, I know that. I don't have the right to ask for your time or your attention or anything else." She paused. "But there are things you need to know. Things I should have told you before I left. Things I've carried alone for too long." He said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with cricket song and the distant sound of a car on the highway and the particular quiet that only rural nights could achieve. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "When I left you 12 years ago, I was pregnant." The words fell like stones into still water, and Damon felt the ripples move through him, disrupting everything he thought he knew about that time, about her leaving, about the 12 years between then and now. His coffee cup sat forgotten on the porch railing. His hands had gone numb, and it had nothing to do with the cold. The night air seemed to still around them, as if the universe itself had paused to absorb the weight of those words. Damon's mind went blank for 3 seconds, then flooded with too many thoughts at once. Images and questions and calculations that didn't add up to anything that made sense. His voice came out hollow. "What?" Reese stood at the bottom of the steps, arms still wrapped around herself, and now he could see she was shaking. Whether from cold or fear or something else entirely, he couldn't tell. Her words tumbled out faster now, as if speed could somehow make them easier. "I found out 2 weeks before I disappeared, took 3 tests to believe it, sat in that bathroom for an hour trying to figure out what to do." Damon still couldn't move. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but his hands gripped the porch railing like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly lost all structure. She continued, her voice raw. "We weren't married. We'd never talked about kids, not seriously, and I knew, God, Damon, I knew what it would mean for you." The words finally came. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the way people looked at us when we were together. The comments, the assumptions." Her breath hitched. "I saw how hard you worked to be above reproach, how careful you were to never give anyone a reason to doubt you, to judge you." He wanted to interrupt, to tell her she was wrong, but memory provided too many examples that proved her point. The woman in the grocery store who'd clutched her purse tighter when he walked past. The security guard who'd followed him through the electronics store even though Reese was holding his hand. The waiter who'd automatically given the check to Reese, assuming Damon couldn't pay. Her voice dropped lower. "A mixed baby. An unmarried black father in a town where people already watched you like you were waiting to make a mistake." She shook her head. "I thought I was protecting you by leaving, by not making your life harder than it already was." The anger came then, hot and righteous. "You decided for me, without asking, without giving me a choice. I know. You looked at my life and decided I couldn't handle it. I know. That's not protection, Reese. That's..." He stopped searching for the right word. That's another kind of prejudice. Soft, maybe, well-intentioned, but prejudice all the same. She flinched but didn't argue. Couldn't argue. Because he was right and they both knew it. His next question came quieter, but it carried more weight than anything else. And the baby? Reese's face crumpled. 12 years of holding it together, of carrying this alone, of building walls around the grief so high and thick that nothing could get in or out. All of it collapsed in the space between one breath and the next. The words came broken. I lost it 8 weeks after I left. The porch seemed to tilt beneath him. Damon sat down hard on the top step legs, no longer trustworthy. His hands found his face, fingers pressing against his eyes like he could push the images back, could stop himself from seeing what she was about to describe. Her voice continued relentless now that she'd started. I was in a motel room in Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. Started bleeding around midnight, knew immediately something was wrong. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. You were alone. Yes. No one to call. No one who knew. No. The grief hit him then, not for the relationship they'd lost, but for the child he'd never known existed, for the future that had been stolen before he even knew it was possible, for the choice that had been made without his knowledge and the consequence that had been born without his presence. His voice came rough. You should have told me. I know. You should have let me be there for you. I know. Her own voice broke on the words. God, Damon, I know. I've spent 12 years knowing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and in the dim light from the house he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. The first time he'd seen her cry in 12 years. Maybe the first time she'd let herself cry about it at all. Minutes passed. Neither of them moved. The stars brightened overhead, indifferent to human pain, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out into the darkness. Finally, Damon's question came quiet. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm tired of running. She looked up at him, eyes red but steady. Because seeing you again made me realize I never actually dealt with any of it. I just buried it and kept moving and thought that was the same as healing. She took a step closer to the porch and he could see her hands trembling. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know the truth. He nodded slowly, not trusting his voice yet. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest, changing the shape of everything that had come before. Understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it complicated it in ways he hadn't anticipated. The words finally came, okay, I know now. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know. She seemed to accept that, turned to leave, then stopped. Her voice came soft, almost lost in the night air. For what it's worth, I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I did, and I was afraid of what that love would cost you. That wasn't your fear to carry alone. No, it wasn't. She walked back to her car and Damon watched until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Then he sat there for a long time with his cold coffee and his grief for a child who'd never existed and a future that had died before it could draw breath. The door opened behind him. Vivian's voice came gentle. You want to talk about it? Not yet. All right. I'll be inside when you're ready. But he wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. The truth was out now, and he'd have to find a way to live with it. This knowledge that rearranged the past and complicated the present, and made the future uncertain in ways it hadn't been even yesterday. Morning arrived with brutal clarity. Damon had slept maybe 3 hours, and those in fragments punctuated by dreams he couldn't quite remember, but woke from with his heart racing. Lyric appeared at his bedroom door at 6:30, already dressed and ready for Saturday cartoons, oblivious to the earthquake that had happened while she slept. Her voice came cheerful. Daddy, can we have pancakes? He forced himself upright, forced a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Sure, baby. Go tell Grandma to start the griddle. After breakfast, pancakes that tasted like cardboard in his mouth, But that lyric devoured with enthusiasm, he found himself in the barn, ostensibly fixing a piece of equipment but really just needing space to think. The barn had always been his sanctuary, the place where he could work with his hands and let his mind process without the weight of anyone's expectations. The memory came unbidden Albany 12 years ago. That apartment on the third floor with the radiator that clanked all winter and the neighbors who argued at 2 in the morning. The ring hidden in his sock drawer saved for over 8 months on a mechanic's salary. The future he'd planned in such meticulous detail, proposal at her favorite restaurant's small wedding. Maybe kids in a few years once they'd saved enough for a down payment on a house. He'd been so sure, so completely certain that they were building towards something permanent. And then she was gone, and he'd spent 6 months trying to find her. Called her friends, the ones who'd answer anyway. Her best friend Linda had finally told him to stop calling. She doesn't want to be found, Damon. You need to let her go. So he had, eventually, boxed up the ring and shoved it in the back of a drawer where he wouldn't have to look at it. Met Jennifer 2 years later, kind, quiet Jennifer who'd never promised forever but had given him lyric before dying in a hospital room with complications no one had seen coming. He'd loved Jennifer, but it had been different. Gentler, less consuming. The kind of love that felt like coming home after a long day rather than like standing on the edge of a cliff with your heart pounding and your hands shaking. Now standing in his barn with grease on his hands and the truth finally revealed, he understood. Reese hadn't just left him. She'd been pregnant and terrified and convinced that she knew what was best for both of them. But she'd been wrong. Not about the difficulty he'd faced, that his whole life would face it until the day he died, but wrong about his strength, wrong about his right to choose, wrong to think that protecting him meant disting for him. The anger returned, but it was different now. Not the hot rage of abandonment, but the cold fury of being underestimated. Of having someone look at your life and decide you couldn't handle more weight. Couldn't bear another burden, couldn't be trusted with your own choices. Vivian appeared in the barn doorway, moving slower than usual. Her heart had been acting up again, he could tell by the way she pressed her hand to her chest when she thought no one was looking. Her voice came without preamble. "You can't fix that radiator, it's been broken for 3 years. He looked down at his hands, at the part he'd been turning over without actually examining. She was right. "Want to tell me what happened last night?" The words came out flat. She was pregnant when she left, lost the baby 2 months later. Alone. Vivian's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on the doorframe. Lord have mercy. She thought she was protecting me. Didn't want to add a mixed baby to my burdens. He set down the part with more force than necessary. Made the decision by herself, for both of us. And now you're angry. Shouldn't I be? Vivian moved farther into the barn, lowering herself carefully onto an overturned crate. You have every right. Question is what you're going to do with it. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Her eyes were sharp despite her age. That girl made a terrible mistake. But she's back now, trying to make amends, not by asking for something, but by being honest. 12 years late. Better late than never gets said for a reason. Vivian shifted on the crate, wincing slightly. You remember when I told you about my husband leaving? You said he came back. After 6 months. 6 months of me raising 2 foster kids alone, wondering if he was dead in a ditch somewhere or just decided he didn't want the life we'd built. Her voice softened. When he came back, I was angrier about the decision than the leaving. That he'd looked at our life and decided what I could handle without asking me. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Vivian continued. I had a choice then. Could send him away. Could hold on to that anger and let it define the rest of my life. Or I could try to understand why he did it and decide if that understanding changed anything. What did you choose? I chose to understand. Didn't happen overnight. Took months of talking of him, proving he'd changed, of me learning to trust again. She met his eyes. But I chose to try. And we had 20 good years after that before the cancer took him. Damon said nothing. The barn was quiet except for the sound of wind moving through the cracks in the old walls. Vivian's next words carried weight. That child upstairs is watching how you handle this. Learning what it means to be hurt and how to respond when someone tries to make amends. She stood slowly. You get to decide what lesson you teach her. She left him alone with that, and Damon went back to pretending to fix the radiator while his mind worked through implications he wasn't ready to name yet. The following week passed in a strange, suspended state. Damon went through the motions, drove Lyric to school, worked on farm equipment, made dinner, helped with homework, but part of his mind stayed fixed on that conversation. On Reese standing at the bottom of his porch steps, confessing something she'd carried alone for 12 years. On Wednesday evening, she came by again. This time in daylight, this time with pie in her hands like some kind of offering. Lyric answered the door before Damon could stir her, and her voice rang out with pure joy. "Miss Reese, did you bring us dessert?" Reese's smile looked uncertain. "Apple pie. I made it this morning. Thought maybe." She saw Damon in the hallway behind Lyric. "If this is a bad time, I can..." His voice came before he could overthink it. "It's fine. Come in." The pie was good, better than good, actually. Vivian complimented the crust, and Lyric ate 2 pieces before Damon made her stop. They sat around the kitchen table like normal people having normal conversation, and if there were undercurrents of tension and unspoken history. Lyric seemed oblivious to them. After Lyric went to watch cartoons in the living room, Reese helped clear the table. Her voice came quiet. "Thank you for letting me stay. Vivian invited you, but you didn't ask me to leave." He rinsed a plate, kept his eyes on the soapy water. "No, I didn't." They stood at the sink together in silence, and something about the domesticity of it, washing dishes side by side like they'd done 1,000 times in that Albany apartment, made his chest tighten with memory. Reese's next words came careful. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would it be okay if I came by sometimes, not often? Just sometimes?" Damon dried his hands on a towel, turned to face her. "Why, Gucci?" "Because I'm trying to face what I did instead of running from it. Because I want to show myself that I can stay." She paused. "And because that little girl in there deserves to see that adults can make mistakes and try to do better." It was the right answer, or at least an honest one. He nodded slowly. "Okay, but Reese, if you leave again, if you disappear without explanation, you'll never see me again, I know." That became the pattern over the next few weeks. Reese would stop by once or twice a week, usually in civilian clothes, usually with some excuse, a book she thought Lyric might like, vegetables from someone's garden. She was passing along a question about farm equipment that they both knew she could have Googled. Lyric loved it. Started asking when Miss Reese would visit next. Started drawing pictures to show her, started unconsciously including her in the category of adults who mattered. Damon watched it happen with mixed feelings. Grateful that his daughter was learning about second chances, terrified that Reese would prove his fears right and disappear again, leaving Lyric to learn a different lesson entirely. One Saturday morning in late November, he ran into her at the hardware store, literally turned the corner by the paint supplies and nearly crashed into her. Her arms steadied him automatically. "Sorry, I wasn't Damon." "Reese." They stood too close in the narrow aisle, and for a moment neither moved. Then Lyric's voice cut through the awkwardness. "Daddy, it's Miss Reese. Are you buying paint too?" Reese stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "Just some brushes. What are you painting?" "My room. Daddy said I could pick any color except black." "Except black and that neon green you wanted." Lyric's expression turned pleading. "But Daddy, neon green would be so cool. Neon green would give me a headache." Reese laughed, and the sound was easy, natural. "What about purple? Purple's a good compromise." "See, Daddy, Miss Reese thinks purple is good." He found himself smiling despite everything. "Purple is negotiable. They spent the next 20 minutes looking at paint samples together, and if anyone in the hardware store found it strange, a black man, a white police officer, and a child debating the merits of lavender versus violet, no one said anything. Or at least no one said anything within earshot. Later that week, Damon's truck broke down on Main Street at 4:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. The starter finally gave up after months of threatening to quit, and he was stranded in front of the post office, with Lyric fidgeting in the passenger seat. He'd just called the tow service when a patrol car pulled up beside him. Reese rolled down her window. "Need assistance?" The formality felt absurd given everything, but he matched it. "Starter's dead. Tow truck's on its way. Want company while you wait?" Lyric answered before he could. "Yes, it's boring just sitting here." Reese parked and got out, leaning against his truck with her arms crossed. They talked about nothing important: Lyric's upcoming school project on Pilgrims, the weather turning colder, whether the high school football team would make playoffs. Normal conversation, easy conversation, the kind of talk that people who trusted each other had. When the tow truck arrived, Reese offered them a ride home. Damon hesitated. Riding in a patrol car felt loaded with implications, but Lyric was already climbing into the back seat with enthusiasm. The drive took 15 minutes. Lyric chattered the entire time about school and friends and the hamster they were getting to adopt in her classroom. Reese listened with apparent genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention. At the farm, Lyric hopped out with a cheerful goodbye. Damon lingered by the passenger door. "Thank you for the ride." "Of course." Something in her expression made him ask, "Reese, why did you come back to Riverside, really?" Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. After a moment, she answered, "I didn't choose it. The department encouraged me to transfer." "From Albany?" "Yes." "Why?" Her voice went flat. "I made a mistake. A bad one." He waited, and after a long silence, she continued. "I was on a traffic stop, my partner and I. Young black man late at night pulled over for a broken taillight." She paused. He reached for his wallet. My partner shouted. I reacted. Damon's stomach turned to ice. "What did you do?" "I fired, twice." Her voice cracked. "It was his phone. He was getting his ID like we'd asked, and I shot him." The world seemed to narrow to just the space inside that patrol car. Damon couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. His question came harsh. "Is he alive?" "Yes, but he's paralyzed from the waist down. Marcus Williams, 32 years old, father of 2. Tears streaked down her face now. "I saw his skin before I saw him as a person. Every bit of training, every good intention, none of it mattered. I reacted from fear that had been planted by stereotypes I never challenged." Damon opened the car door, needing distance, needing air. "How do I trust you around my daughter? I don't know if you can, or should." Her voice came raw. "But I'm doing the work. Therapy twice a week, implicit bias training, community programs. I visited Marcus's family to apologize. They wouldn't see me. I don't blame them." He stood outside the car, one hand still on the open door. "You shot an unarmed black man, and you're here still on the force wearing a badge. I should have been fired, I know that. The union protected me, and the department offered this transfer instead." She met his eyes. "I can't undo it. Can only try to be better. Try to make sure I never react from fear again." The silence stretched. Lyric called from the porch, asking if he was coming. Vivian stood behind her, watching. Damon's voice came quiet. "I need time to process this." "I understand." He closed the car door and walked toward the house, legs moving on autopilot. Behind him, he heard Reese's car pull away, and he wondered if this was the end, if knowing the full truth meant understanding why they could never move forward. Thanksgiving arrived, cold and gray. Vivian had been planning the meal for weeks, and despite everything tradition held, at 2:45, 15 minutes before dinner, there was a knock on the door. Lyric ran to answer it before Damon could intervene, and her squeal of delight told him who'd arrived. "Miss Reese, you came." Damon appeared in the hallway to find Reese standing awkwardly with wine and flowers, dressed in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger somehow, vulnerable. Her eyes found his. "Vivian invited me. I can leave if—" Vivian's voice cut in from the kitchen. "Don't you dare, I set a place for you. Now get in here and help me with these sweet potatoes." Dinner was strange cordial on the surface, waited underneath. They talked about safe topics, Lyric's school play next month, Vivian's church committee, the new grocery store opening in town. Reese helped serve, helped clear, helped wash dishes after. When Lyric finally fell asleep on the couch stuffed with turkey and pie, Damon found himself on the porch with Reese while Vivian tucked the child into bed. His question came without warning. "Tell me about Marcus Williams. All of it." So she did. Every detail of that night, the traffic stop, the nervous movement, the shout from her partner, her own hand reaching for her weapon. The 2 shots fired, the moment of realization when she saw it was a phone. The ambulance, the hospital, the investigation that cleared her of criminal charges but not moral ones. She told him about the therapy, about learning to recognize her own bias, about the shame that woke her at 3 in the morning, about visiting Marcus's family and being turned away, about accepting that some damage couldn't be undone, only acknowledged and learned from. When she finished, Damon sat in silence for a long time. Finally, his voice came measured. "I should tell you to leave, to never come back. I know, but I keep thinking about what Vivian said, about Lyric watching, about what I'm teaching her." He turned to look at Reese. "I don't forgive you, not for leaving, not for what you did in Albany, but I'm willing to let you try to earn it." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet, because if you give me any reason to doubt, any reason to think Lyric isn't safe, any reason to believe you're not doing the work, I'll leave. I promise." They sat in silence as the stars came out and something fragile began to build between them. Not trust, not yet, but the foundation on which trust might someday be constructed. Monday morning, Reese arrived at the police station to find Officer Garrett Voss waiting by her desk. He'd been on the force 15 years, respected by some, tolerated by others, and generally considered harmless if occasionally problematic. His voice came casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Saw you out at the Ashford place on Thanksgiving, Bennett." "Vivian Ashford invited me to dinner." "That right." He leaned against her desk. "Just want to make sure you're keeping things professional." "My personal life is my business, Voss." Sure. Just saying we need to be careful about optics. Black guy, white female officer, people talk." Reese felt her jaw tighten. "Are you suggesting there's something inappropriate?" "I'm suggesting you should be mindful. Wouldn't want anyone thinking you're compromised." He straightened. "Friendly advice, take it or leave it." He walked away before she could respond, and Reese sat at her desk with anger simmering under her skin. Not because Voss was wrong about people talking, he wasn't, but because his concern wasn't about her welfare or even about professional standards. It was about his discomfort with something that challenged his assumptions. That evening, she told Damon about it. They were in his kitchen. She'd stopped by to return a book Lyric had lent her, and the words came out before she could stop them. His response was immediate. "What's his name?" "It doesn't matter. He's not doing anything illegal." "He's making you uncomfortable." "That matters. Damon, I can handle—" "I know you can." His voice softened. "But you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Reese nodded slowly and something shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but unmistakably they'd crossed some invisible line from strangers to something more complicated. March arrived with false promises of spring, warm afternoons that turned bitter by evening rain that froze overnight into patterns on windows. By the 3rd Saturday of the month, the temperature had climbed high enough that Lyric started agitating for outdoor time. Damon stood at the kitchen window watching her bounce on her toes with 8-year-old impatience. "Please, Daddy, I'll stay on the trails. I'll be back by 5, please." The woods behind the farm had been her playground since she was old enough to walk steady. She knew every path, every landmark, every fallen tree that made a good climbing challenge. He'd taught her to read the sun's position, to follow the creek back home, to whistle loud if she got turned around. His voice came resigned. 5 o'clock, not 5:15. 5 exactly, promise. She was already pulling on her jacket, already halfway out the door. Vivian appeared from the living room with a book in her hands. Let the child breathe, she's sensible. That was 2:30 in the afternoon. By 5:15, when Lyric hadn't appeared, Damon's concern was just starting to build. By 5:30, concern had shifted to worry. By 5:45, he was calling her name into the woods, voice carrying through bare branches. At 6 o'clock, with the sun dropping fast and temperature falling faster, he called the police. Reese's voice came through clear and professional. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't go searching alone. You could get lost too. But every instinct screamed at him to move, to find his daughter, to do something besides stand uselessly by the tree line. Vivian gripped his arm. Wait for help. Running blind won't save her. Reese arrived at 6:12 with 2 other officers and a K9 unit. She'd changed into tactical gear, all business, but her eyes found his with something beyond professional concern. Her words came quick and certain. When did you last see her? 2:30. She went into the woods. She knows them. Where does she usually go? North Trail toward the creek. There's a meadow she likes. Reese was already moving, organizing the search into quadrants, directing officers with calm authority. Garrett Voss had responded too, and his eyes tracked between Reese and Damon with barely concealed calculation. Voss's voice came loaded. How'd she go missing? You weren't watching her. The words hit like accusation, like judgment, like everything Damon feared people thought about him as a parent. His response came tight. She knows these woods better than most adults. Clearly not well enough. Reese cut in sharp. Voss, search grid B. Now. By 7 o'clock, the temperature had dropped to 45 degrees. Lyric had worn only a light jacket, enough for afternoon, not enough for night. The K9 unit picked up her scent, heading northwest away from familiar trails. Damon wanted to follow, needed to follow, but Reese stopped him. You're too close to this. Let us work. She's my daughter. I know. Her hand found his arm, brief and grounding. And I will find her. Trust me. The word trust hung between them, all the weight of their history compressed into those 2 syllables. He'd spent months learning to trust her again, learning to believe she wouldn't disappear, learning to let her be part of their lives. Now she was asking him to trust her with the only thing that mattered more than his own survival. His throat closed around the words, okay, find her. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then turned and disappeared into the darkening woods. Time moved wrong after that. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe collapsed into seconds. Damon couldn't tell anymore. He stood at the tree line with Vivian beside him, both of them silent, both of them listening to radio chatter that meant nothing and everything. At 7:30, Reese's voice came through. I've got something. Grid C, northwest quadrant. Damon's heart stopped, then started again, too fast. More radio silence. Then at 7:52, timestamps would burn into his memory forever. Reese's voice came through clear. I have her. She's alive. Minor injuries. We're at the ravine north side. The relief hit him so hard his knees buckled. Vivian caught him, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman with a failing heart, and her voice came rough with emotion. Thank God. Oh, thank God. They brought Lyric up 20 minutes later. Paramedics swarmed immediately, checking vitals, examining the ankle she'd twisted in the fall. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket, shaking from cold but alert. And when she saw Damon, her face crumpled. Her voice came small. Daddy, I'm sorry, I went too far. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, pulled her against his chest. You're okay. That's all that matters. You're okay. Over Lyric's head, his eyes found Reese. She stood apart from the group, still in tactical gear, hair loose from its bun. Face streaked with dirt. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who'd just climbed down a ravine and back up with a child strapped to her. Their eyes met and he mouthed two words, "Thank you." Her expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable that she quickly masked as other officers congratulated her on the find. The hospital kept Lyric overnight for observation. Mild hypothermia, sprained ankle, nothing that wouldn't heal. But they wanted to monitor her, make sure nothing developed, and Damon wasn't about to argue. Vivian stayed with Lyric while she slept, leaving Damon and Reese alone in the hallway at 11 p.m. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, and somewhere down the corridor a machine beeped, rhythmic and constant. Reese's voice came quiet. "She's going to be fine. Because of you. I was just doing my job." "No." He turned to face her fully. "You went down that ravine. Voss told me how steep it was. You could have waited for specialized equipment, but you didn't." Her hands twisted together. "I couldn't wait. She was cold and scared, and I had to get to her. You risked yourself for my daughter." "Of course I did." Her voice cracked slightly. "Damon, I would do anything for that child, for both of you." The words settled between them, honest and undefended. After a moment, she continued, "When I was searching for her, all I could think was, what if I can't find her? What if I fail you again?" "You didn't fail. I prayed. First time in years." She looked up at him. "Please let me find his daughter. Let me do something right for once." He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. Her fingers were still cold from the search, and she gripped his like she was afraid he'd pull away. His voice came rough. "I realized something tonight. When you told me to trust you, when you went into those woods, I already did. Somewhere between Thanksgiving and today, I started trusting you completely. I won't let you down. I know." And he did know, bone deep, in a way that had nothing to do with logic. They stood in the hospital hallway holding hands. And for the first time since she'd reappeared in his life, Damon felt something other than grief or anger or confusion. He felt hope. Over the next weeks, something shifted in Riverside. News of the rescue spread with the speed that only small towns achieved, and the narrative. Officer Hartwell rappelling down a ravine in near darkness to save a child became part of local legend. Hollis Crane stopped by the farm with a casserole. "Heard about Lyric. Glad she's okay. That officer showed real character." Mrs. Patterson approached Vivian after church. "We may have been too quick to judge. Officer Hartwell proved herself." Conrad Baker offered Lyric free kettle corn at the market. Brave girl and brave officer. It wasn't universal. Some people still whispered, some still watched with suspicion when Reese's car appeared at the farm. But enough had changed that the atmosphere felt different, lighter somehow. Even Garrett Voss seemed subdued, though whether from genuine respect or simple caution remained unclear. April brought real warmth, and with it a gradual integration of Reese into their daily life. She came for dinner twice a week, then 3 times, helped Lyric with homework, attended a soccer game and cheered too loud, fixed the loose step on the porch that Damon had been meaning to get to for months. In May, Vivian had a scare, woke, gasping for air at 2 a.m, hand pressed to her chest, face gray. Reese drove them to the hospital and stayed the entire night, even though Vivian insisted she should go home and sleep. The doctors adjusted medications and sent Vivian home with warnings about stress. As they left, Vivian caught Reese's hand. "Your family now, whether it's official or not." By June, a new pattern had emerged. Reese kept clothes at the farm, a toothbrush in the bathroom, books on the nightstand. No formal decision had been made. No conversation about moving in. It just happened gradually, naturally, the way tides shift, without anyone marking the exact moment the water changed. In late July, Damon finally had the talk with Lyric, the one he'd been preparing for since she was born. They sat at the kitchen table, and Reese was there too, because Lyric had asked her to be. His voice came gentle but firm. "Baby, we need to talk about something important, about staying safe." He went through it, hands visible. "Speak respectfully. Don't argue even if you're right. Call him immediately after. The same crushing instructions every black parent gave their children. Reese added softly, "Your daddy's rules will keep you safe. Always follow them, even if the officer seems nice. Always." Lyric listened with wide eyes, and Damon saw the moment her innocence cracked just slightly. The moment she understood the world was more complicated than she'd thought. After Lyric went outside to play, Reese's voice came rough. "I hate that she has to learn this." "So do I." They sat in heavy silence until Lyric's laughter drifted through the window and life continued because it had to. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch swing after Lyric had gone to bed. Cicadas sang their final songs of summer and the air smelled of cut grass and possibility. Damon's words came without planning. "I love you." Reese went still, lifted her head from his shoulder. "What?" "I love you, not who you were, not who I wanted you to be. Who you are now." Tears caught the last light. "I never stopped loving you. Even when I left, even when I was alone and terrified, I loved you." "I know." She kissed him then, and it tasted like forgiveness and promise. And all the years between then and now distilled into a single moment. October arrived 14 months later, painting the farm in shades of amber and rust. Reese had been living there officially for 6 months now, sharing Damon's room, sharing his life, weaving herself into the fabric of their family. Saturday morning came bright and cold. Damon stood at the stove making pancakes while Reese sat at the table with coffee. Lyric hunched over homework and Vivian read the newspaper. Normal, domestic, perfect in its imperfection. His heart hammered as he spoke. "Lyric, can you check behind the butter in the fridge?" "Why?" "Just check." She opened the refrigerator with 9-year-old skepticism, then gasped, "Daddy, there's a box. Bring it here." Lyric carried the small velvet box to the table like it might explode. Reese's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Damon knelt beside Reese's chair and opened the box. The ring inside was the same one from 12 years ago. Simple gold band, modest diamond saved for over 8 months on a mechanic's salary. His voice came steady. "Reese Hartwell, 12 years ago I had this ring ready but never got to ask. Then you left and we both broke in different ways. But you came back. And more than that, you stayed. You stayed when it was hard, when people judged. You saved our daughter. You became part of our family." He paused. "Will you marry me?" Reese's hand covered her mouth. "That's the same ring. Never could sell it. Will you?" "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Lyric squealed and threw her arms around both of them. Vivian rose from her chair. "About time, boy." Everyone laughed, and the kitchen filled with a happiness that felt earned rather than given. 6 months later, April returned with flowers and the kind of light that made everything look new. The wedding was small, 40 guests on the farm property. White chairs set up near the tree line, everything simple and honest. Vivian officiated, standing before them in her best dress. These two found each other twice. First time, the world wasn't ready. Second time, they were. Damon's vows came from somewhere deep. "You left me broken. You came back and showed me that broken things can heal if you're willing to do the work. I promise I'll stay even when it's hard." Reese's voice shook. "I ran from fear. You taught me that staying requires more courage. I promise no more running. This is home." Lyric brought the rings with immense seriousness and whispered to Reese loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm so happy you're staying." "Me too, sweetheart." The ceremony concluded with a kiss that lasted just long enough to make Lyric giggle. As they walked back down the aisle, Damon saw faces that had once been skeptical now smiling with genuine warmth. Hollis Crane, Mrs. Patterson, Conrad Baker. Not everyone came. Garrett Voss had declined the invitation, or more accurately, had simply not responded. Some people would never accept what this family represented, but enough people showed up to fill the space with love. During the reception, as guests mingled and ate and danced on grass still damp from morning dew, a letter arrived by messenger. Reese opened it away from the crowd, and Damon watched her face transform as she read. When she returned, she handed him the single page without speaking. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom read, Marcus Williams. The letter was brief, Officer Hartwell. I received your invitation. I won't be attending, and I want to be clear that I have not forgiven you for what you did to me. What you took from me can never be returned, but I've watched your efforts over these past 2 years. The therapy, the training, the community work. I've heard about the child you saved and the family you've built. I can't forgive. Maybe I never will. But I can see you're trying to be better than you were. That means something. I hope you find the happiness I lost, Marcus Williams. Reese's hands shook as Damon finished reading. He folded the letter carefully and pulled her close. It's not forgiveness, but it's something. It's more than I deserve. Maybe, but you'll keep earning it, one day at a time. She nodded against his chest, and they stood like that for a long moment before rejoining the celebration. As evening arrived and the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Damon found himself on the porch with his family. Vivian in her rocking chair, finally resting after a long day. Lyric dancing with friends on the grass below. Reese beside him, her hand in his, her ring catching the last light. No one spoke. Words felt unnecessary. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain and the loss and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. About Reese and her courage to face her worst mistakes instead of running from them. About Lyric learning that people could change if they were willing to do the work. About Vivian's quiet wisdom that had guided them all. He thought about Marcus Williams and the grief that would never fully heal, the forgiveness that might never come. About Garrett Voss and others like him whose minds would likely never change. About the systemic problems that couldn't be fixed by individual redemption. But he also thought about the 40 people who'd come today to celebrate. About Hollis Crane bringing a gift. About Mrs. Patterson's quilt and Conrad Baker's honey. About small victories and gradual change and the possibility that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect. Not complete, but real. Reese's voice came soft. What are you thinking? That we made it. Not to some perfect ending, but to something true. That's better than perfect. Yes, it is. Lyric ran up the porch steps, breathless from dancing. Daddy, can I stay up late, please? He smiled. It's your mom's wedding day. What does she say? Lyric turned to Reese with hopeful eyes, and Reese pretended to consider seriously before nodding. 1 more hour, then bed. Okay, Mom. Lyric bounded back down the steps, the title slipping out naturally like she'd been waiting for permission to say it. Reese's eyes filled with tears, and Damon pulled her closer. Vivian's rocking chair creaked its familiar rhythm, and overhead, the first stars began to appear. They sat together as darkness fell and music continued and life moved forward the way it always did, imperfect and complicated and occasionally painful, but also beautiful, in ways that only came from choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Because that was what love meant, not the absence of hurt, but the willingness to work through it, not perfection, but the promise to keep trying, not running when things got hard, but standing together and facing whatever came next. They'd found their way back to each other, not to who they were, but to who they could be together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.